Life on the Double Creek Ranch had a rhythm all its own. Every morning at 5:30, Jack would wake up to the sound of his old rooster crowing. He'd roll out of bed quietly, trying not to wake his wife Anna, who was usually already stirring. Anyway, she was always the first to hear when baby Luke started fussing in his crib. "I'll get him," Anna would whisper, her voice still thick with sleep. Jack would kiss her forehead and head out to start his morning chores while she tended to. Their youngest Dot, the ranch sat on 800 acres of Montana grassland, with rolling hills that stretched as far as the eye could see. Jack had inherited the land from his grandfather, but he'd built everything else from scratch. The red barn, the fencing, the water systems, all of it came together piece by piece over the years. He was proud of what they'd created together. Anna would have breakfast ready by the time he finished feeding the cattle. The kitchen always smelled like fresh coffee and whatever she was cooking up, usually scrambled eggs from their own chickens, bacon from the pig they'd raised last year, and toast made from bread she baked herself. The twins, Tommy and Katie, would stumble down the stairs still rubbing sleep from their eyes. They were 6 years old and full of energy from the moment they woke up. "Daddy, can we ride the horses today?" Katie would ask almost every morning. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's stubborn streak. "Maybe after school, Princess?" Jack would say, ruffling her hair. "But only if you and Tommy get your chores done first." Little Rosie, who was 4, would usually appear next, dragging her favorite stuffed cow behind her. Anna always said Rosie was going to be a rancher just like her daddy. The little girl loved following Jack around the property, asking a million questions about everything from why the grass was green to where baby cows came from. Baby Luke was 18 months old and just starting to walk. He'd toddle around the kitchen, grabbing onto chair legs and trying to chase the family dog, a golden retriever named Buster. Anna was always right behind him, making sure he didn't get into trouble. After breakfast, Jack would drive the older kids to the school bus stop at the end of their long driveway. It was a 15-minute ride, and he cherished those quiet moments with Tommy and Katie. They'd tell him about their dreams from the night before or ask him questions about the ranch. Sometimes they'd see deer or wild turkeys on the way, and Jack would slow down so the kids could get a good look. The bus would arrive right on time, driven by Mrs. Peterson, who'd been doing the route for 20 years. She knew every kid by name and always had a smile ready. "Have a good day at school," Jack would call out as Tommy and Katie climbed the big yellow steps. "Learn something new today." "We will, Daddy," they'd shout back through the windows as the bus pulled away. Back at the house, Anna would be getting Rosie ready for her day. Since Rosie wasn't old enough for school yet, she spent her mornings helping her mother around the house. Well, trying to help anyway. Mostly she just made things more interesting. Jack's days were filled with the endless work that came with running a cattle ranch. He had nearly 200 head of cattle to care for, and each one needed attention. Some days he'd be checking fences, making sure none of his animals could wander off onto the neighboring properties. Other days he'd be moving cattle from one pasture to another, giving the grass time to grow back. The work was hard, but Jack loved it. There was something satisfying about working with his hands, about building something real and lasting. When he looked out over his land and saw his cattle grazing peacefully, he felt a deep sense of accomplishment. Anna managed everything else with grace that still amazed Jack after 8 years of marriage. She kept the books for the ranch, balanced their checkbook, and somehow always knew exactly how much money they had and where every penny needed to go. She maintained a huge garden that provided most of their vegetables through the summer and fall. She canned and preserved food for the winter months, just like her grandmother had taught her, but more than anything, Anna kept their family running smoothly. She was the one who remembered every doctor's appointment, every school event, every birthday party the kids were invited to. She helped with homework, kissed scraped knees, and somehow always knew exactly what to say when one of the children was upset. Evenings on the ranch were Jack's favorite time. After the children were fed and bathed, the whole family would often sit on the front porch. Jack would hold baby Luke while Anna rocked in the old chair that had belonged to her mother. Tommy and Katie would play with Buster in the yard. And little Rosie would chase fireflies when the weather was warm. They'd watch the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Sometimes they'd see eagles soaring overhead or catch a glimpse of the neighbors' horses running across the distant hills. "This is perfect," Anna would say, reaching over to squeeze Jack's hand. "This is exactly the life I dreamed of." Jack felt the same way. He'd grown up poor, in the city, never imagining he'd end up as a rancher with a beautiful wife and 4 healthy children. Some nights he'd lie awake wondering how he'd gotten so lucky. The ranch wasn't making them rich, but it provided everything they needed. They had fresh air, wide open spaces, and the satisfaction that came from honest work. Their children were growing up with strong values, learning the importance of hard work and taking care of the land on Sundays. They'd all pile into Jack's old pickup truck and drive to the little church in town. Anna would have the kids dressed in their best clothes, hair combed and faces clean. Jack would wear his one good shirt and the cowboy hat Anna had given him for their first anniversary after church. They'd sometimes stop at the diner for lunch or visit Anna's parents who lived about an hour away. The kids loved seeing their grandparents, and Anna's mother always sent them home with fresh-baked cookies and hugs that lasted a little too long. Those were the golden days, though Jack didn't know it at the time. He thought they'd go on forever. He thought he and Anna would grow old together on the ranch, watching their children grow up and maybe start families of their own. He pictured himself teaching his grandchildren to ride horses and work cattle, passing down the knowledge his own grandfather had given him. Life felt solid and predictable in the best possible way. Every day brought its own small challenges, but nothing they couldn't handle together. Anna was his partner in everything, and together they felt like they could face whatever came their way. The future stretched out ahead of them like the rolling hills that surrounded their home, full of possibility and promise, with no hint of the storm that was coming. February 14th started like any other winter morning on the ranch. The ground was covered with a thin layer of snow that had fallen during the night, and the air was crisp and cold. Jack woke up at his usual time, but something felt different. Anna wasn't moving around getting ready like she normally did. "You feeling okay, honey?" he asked, reaching over to touch her forehead. She felt a little warm, but not feverish. "Just tired," Anna mumbled, pulling the blanket up higher. "Maybe I'm coming down with something. The kids have been bringing home every bug from school." Jack kissed her cheek gently. "Stay in bed a little longer?" "I'll get the kids ready for school today," Anna smiled weakly. "You're the best husband in the world, you know that?" Those were the last words she ever spoke to him. Jack headed downstairs to start breakfast, something he rarely did. Anna was always the one who handled the morning routine with the children. He fumbled around the kitchen, trying to remember where everything was kept. The coffee was easy enough, but making breakfast for 4 kids was more challenging than he'd expected. Baby Luke was crying in his high chair, wanting his bottle. Tommy and Katie were arguing over who got to sit in the chair closest to the window. Little Rosie was standing on a kitchen stool, trying to help by reaching for plates that were way too high for her to grab safely. "Daddy, you're doing it wrong," Katie announced, watching Jack struggle with the scrambled eggs. "Mommy always puts cheese in them." "And she cuts the toast into triangles," Tommy added helpfully. Jack was doing his best, but everything seemed to take twice as long as when Anna did it. The eggs were a little burned, the toast was uneven, and he'd forgotten to warm up Luke's bottle. But the kids ate without complaining, sensing somehow that this morning was different. "Where's Mommy?" Rosie asked, looking toward the stairs. "She's not feeling well, Princess. She's sleeping in today." Jack managed to get the older kids dressed and ready for school, though Tommy's shirt was on backwards and Katie's hair wasn't brushed properly. He bundled them into the truck for the ride to the bus stop, leaving Anna sleeping and Baby Luke playing in his playpen. The drive to the bus stop took the usual 15 minutes. Jack waved goodbye to Tommy and Katie as they climbed onto the school bus, then headed back home. He was already thinking about all the work that needed to be done around the ranch that day. When he walked back into the house, everything seemed quiet. Too quiet. Rosie was still eating her breakfast at the kitchen table, and Luke was babbling in his playpen. But there was no sound from upstairs. Jack climbed the stairs 2 at a time, expecting to find Anna still sleeping. Instead, he found her. On the bathroom floor, she was lying on her side, her face pale and her lips slightly blue. Jack dropped to his knees beside her, his hands shaking as he checked for a pulse. Nothing. Her skin was already growing cold. Anna, wake up! He shook her gently, then more urgently. Come on, honey, please wake up. But even as he said the words, Jack knew she was gone. Something deep inside him knew that his wife, his partner, the mother of his children, had left them forever. With trembling fingers, he dialed 911 on the phone beside their bed. The operator's voice seemed to come from very far away. 911, what's your emergency? My wife, she's not breathing. I think she's gone. The next hour passed in a blur of paramedics, police officers, and neighbors who seemed to appear from nowhere. Someone must have called Anna's parents, because they arrived just as the ambulance was leaving. Anna's mother was crying so hard she could barely stand. The paramedics tried everything they could, but it was too late. The doctor at the hospital later explained that Anna had suffered a massive heart attack. At 29 years old, with no history of heart problems, it was completely unexpected. These things just happen sometimes, he said, as if that explanation could somehow make sense of the senseless. Jack sat in the hospital hallway, staring at the white walls and listening to the sounds of life going on around him. Nurses walking by, machines beeping, families talking in hushed voices. Everything felt unreal, like he was watching someone else's life fall apart. Mr. Thompson? A nurse appeared beside him. Is there someone we can call for you? Someone who can help with the children? The children. Jack's stomach dropped as he realized that Tommy and Katie were still at school, completely unaware that their world had just been shattered. Rosie and Luke were at home with Anna's mother, probably wondering where Daddy had gone. How do you tell a 6-year-old that Mommy is never coming home? How do you explain to a 4-year-old that the person who tucked her in every night, who kissed her scraped knees and read her bedtime stories, is gone forever? How do you help an 18-month-old baby understand why the warm, loving arms that held him every day will never hold him again? Jack drove home in a daze, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. The ranch looked exactly the same as when he'd left that morning, but everything was different now. The red barn where he and Anna had shared their first kiss as newlyweds. The garden where she'd spent countless hours growing vegetables for their family. The front porch where they'd sat together just the night before, making plans for spring. Planting, Anna's mother met him at the door, her eyes red from crying. The children don't know yet, she whispered. I didn't know what to say. Tommy and Katie came running when they heard Jack's truck in the driveway. They were excited to tell him about their day at school, completely innocent of the tragedy that had unfolded while they were learning math and reading stories. Daddy, guess what happened at school today? Katie called out, her face bright with excitement. Jack knelt down and pulled both children into his arms, holding them as tightly as he dared. How could he destroy their happiness? How could he be the one to break their hearts? Where's Mommy? Tommy asked, looking around. Grandma said she was sleeping, but it's afternoon now. Jack looked into their trusting faces and felt his own heart breaking all over again. These beautiful children, who had never known anything but love and security, were about to learn that the world could be cruel and unfair. Kids, I need to tell you something very important, Jack began, his voice barely above a whisper. Something very sad happened today. The funeral 3 days later was the hardest thing Jack had ever endured. The little church was packed with people from town, neighbors from surrounding ranches, and friends Anna had made over the years. Everyone had a story about her kindness, her generosity, her infectious laugh, but all Jack could think about was how quiet the house would be without her voice calling out good morning. How empty their bed would feel without her warmth beside him. How lost he felt without his partner, his best friend, his anchor in every storm. As the casket was lowered into the ground, Jack held his 4 children close and wondered how he would ever be strong enough to raise them alone. The first morning after the funeral, Jack woke up to the sound of baby Luke crying. For a split second, in that foggy space between sleep and awareness, he expected to hear Anna's gentle voice soothing their son. Instead, there was only the relentless wailing that seemed to echo through the empty house. Jack stumbled out of bed, his body aching from exhaustion and grief. He hadn't really slept in days, just dozed fitfully between Luke's feedings and the nightmares that jolted him awake. The baby's room felt cold and unfamiliar without Anna's presence. Her rocking chair sat empty in the corner, the soft yellow blanket she'd been knitting still draped over the arm. "It's okay, buddy," Jack whispered, lifting Luke from his crib. The baby's face was red and blotchy from crying, and his diaper was soaked through. Jack fumbled with the snaps on the tiny pajamas, his large, work-roughened hands struggling with something Anna had made look so effortless. By the time he got Luke cleaned up and fed, it was nearly 7 in the morning. The older children would need breakfast soon, and someone had to get them ready for school. Jack looked around the kitchen, trying to remember where Anna kept everything. The coffee maker was easy enough, but where did she store the cereal? Which cabinet had the kids' plates? Tommy appeared first, his hair sticking up in every direction. "Daddy, I can't find any clean clothes," he said, his voice small and uncertain. Jack's heart sank. "The laundry." Anna had always handled the laundry, and now there were piles of dirty clothes everywhere. Just wear what you wore yesterday, son. We'll figure it out tonight." Katie came downstairs wearing her pajamas and holding her favorite stuffed animal. "I don't want to go to school today," she announced, her lower lip trembling. "I want to stay home with you and wait for Mommy to come back." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. How many times would he have to explain that Mommy wasn't coming back? How many mornings would start with this same crushing realization? "Honey, we talked about this," Jack said gently, kneeling down to Katie's level. "Mommy is in heaven now. Remember, she can't come back, but she's watching over us." "But I need her to braid my hair," Katie whispered, touching the tangled mess on her head. "You don't know how to do it right." Jack stared at his daughter's hair, feeling completely helpless. Anna had made it look so easy, her fingers moving quickly through Katie's long strands, creating perfect braids in minutes. Jack had never paid attention to how she did it. Why hadn't he learned these things? "We'll figure it out together, okay?" he said, though he had no idea how Rosie wandered into the kitchen still in her nightgown, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, I'm hungry," she said simply. Jack opened the refrigerator, staring at the contents. There were some eggs, milk that might be getting old, and a few leftover casseroles that neighbors had brought over. He grabbed the eggs, hoping he could manage scrambled eggs for the 3rd day in a row, the morning routine that had once run like clockwork under Anna's guidance now felt like chaos. Jack burned the eggs while trying to help Katie brush her teeth. Luke spit up all over his clean shirt while Jack was attempting to comb Tommy's hair. Rosie spilled orange juice on her dress, and there wasn't time to change her before the bus arrived. "Daddy, you forgot to pack our lunches," Tommy pointed out as they rushed toward the door. Lunches, Jack had completely forgotten. Anna always had their lunchboxes ready the night before, with sandwiches cut into fun shapes and little notes tucked inside. I'll call the school. You can buy lunch today." The ride to the bus stop was quiet. Tommy and Katie seemed to sense their father's stress, and they didn't chatter like they usually did. When the bus arrived, Jack watched them climb the steps with heavy hearts. Katie's hair was still a mess. Tommy's shirt was wrinkled, and both children looked tired and sad. "Have a good day," Jack called out, but the words felt hollow. How could they have a good day when their world had been turned upside down? Back at the house, Jack tried to settle into some kind of routine with Rosie and Luke, but every task seemed overwhelming. Luke needed constant attention, crying whenever Jack put him down. Rosie kept asking for things that only Anna knew how to do. Where were her special crayons? Could she have the crackers that looked like fish? Why didn't Daddy know how to play the games Mommy used to play? By noon, Jack felt like he was drowning. The house was a mess. Luke was cranky and wouldn't nap, and Rosie was getting into everything. Meanwhile, the ranch work was piling up. He could see his cattle from the kitchen window, and he knew they needed fresh water in the far pasture. The fence in the south field had been damaged in the last storm and needed repair. But how could he do any of that with a baby who wouldn't settle and a 4-year-old who needed constant supervision? His neighbor Pete showed up around 1 o'clock, knocking on the door with his hat in his hands. "Just wanted to check on you, Jack, see if you need anything." Jack almost broke down right there on the doorstep. Pete had known Anna since they were teenagers. He'd been at their wedding, had helped Jack build the barn, had shared countless barbecues and holiday dinners with their family. "I don't know what I'm doing, Pete," Jack admitted, his voice cracking. "I can't even get the kids ready for school properly. How am I supposed to run this ranch and take care of 4 children?" Pete stepped inside, looking around at the chaos. Toys were scattered everywhere, dishes were piled in the sink, and baby Luke was crying in his high chair while Rosie tried to feed him crackers. "You're doing the best you can," Pete said firmly. "Anna knew you were a good father. You just need time to figure out a new routine." But time felt like a luxury Jack couldn't afford. Every day brought new challenges he wasn't prepared for. Katie came home from school crying because the other kids had noticed her messy hair. Tommy got in trouble for falling asleep during math class. The teacher called to express concern about both children's behavior and appearance. "Are you sure you're managing okay at home?" Mrs. Henderson asked gently during the phone call. The children seemed to be struggling with the adjustment. Jack wanted to shout that of course they were struggling. Their mother was gone, their father was falling apart. Their whole world had been destroyed in a single morning. But instead he just said, "We're doing our best." The evenings were the hardest. Anna had always handled bedtime with such grace, reading stories and singing lullabies until each child was peacefully asleep. Jack tried to maintain the routine, but everything took twice as long. He couldn't remember which book each child liked best or the words to the songs Anna used to sing. "You're not doing it right," Katie said one night as Jack attempted to braid her hair before bed. "Mommy's braids never hurt." "I know, sweetheart. I'm still learning." "When will you know how to do it like Mommy?" Jack's hand stilled in her hair. "I don't know, Katie. Maybe never exactly like Mommy, but I'll keep trying to get better." By the time all 4 children were finally asleep, Jack would collapse on the couch, exhausted and overwhelmed. The lunch book sat unopened on the kitchen table. Bills were piling up, unopened. The laundry was overflowing from every hamper in. The house, he'd sit there in the dark wondering how Anna had made it all look so easy. She'd managed the household, helped with homework, kept everyone fed and clean and happy, all while supporting his work on the ranch. Now Jack could barely handle the basic necessities. Some nights he'd walk through the house and see Anna everywhere. Her coffee cup still sat in the sink. Her favorite book was still on the nightstand, bookmark holding her place on page 207. Her apron hung on the hook by the stove, waiting for hands that would never wear it again. The weight of responsibility felt crushing. 4 children depending on him for everything. A ranch that required constant attention. A future that stretched ahead without the partner who had made everything possible. Jack began to understand that his old life was truly over, and he had no idea how to build a new one. By the 6th month after Anna's death, Jack had stopped pretending things were under control. The ranch that had once been his pride and joy was falling apart, and so was his family. He sat at the kitchen table at 2 a.m, staring at a pile of bills he couldn't pay and wondering how everything had gone so wrong so fast. The letter from the bank lay open in front of him, the words blurring together from exhaustion and despair. "Final notice," it said in bold red letters. "Foreclosure proceedings will begin in 30 days unless payment is received in full." The amount they wanted was staggering. Months of missed mortgage payments, late fees, and interest that had piled up while Jack struggled just to buy groceries. Baby Luke was crying again upstairs. He'd been doing that a lot lately, as if he could sense the tension in the house. Jack rubbed his face with his hands, feeling the stubble that had grown because he couldn't remember the last time he'd bothered to shave properly. He should go up and check on Luke, but he felt frozen in place, overwhelmed by the weight of everything falling apart around him. The crying got louder, then suddenly stopped, A few minutes later, he heard small footsteps on the stairs. Katie appeared in the doorway, her hair messy from sleep, and her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched tightly in her arms. "Daddy," Luke was crying, but then he stopped. "I think Rosie went in there," she said quietly. Jack's heart clenched. His 4-year-old daughter was taking care of the baby because he was too broken to do it himself. What kind of father had he become? "Thank you, sweetheart. Go back to bed, I'll check on them." But Katie didn't move. She stood there in her 2 small pajamas. Jack kept forgetting to buy new clothes as the kids grew, and looked at him with eyes that seemed far too old for her. 6-year-old face. "Daddy, are you okay? You look sad all the time now." The simple question nearly broke him. Jack wanted to tell her that, yes, he was okay, that everything would be fine, that he had everything under control. But the lies wouldn't come. Instead, tears started falling down his cheeks, and he couldn't stop them. Katie walked over and climbed onto his lap, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "It's okay to cry, Daddy. Mommy used to say that crying helps wash the sadness away." Jack held his daughter close, breathing in the scent of her hair that still somehow smelled like the strawberry shampoo Anna used to use. For a moment, he felt a tiny spark of comfort. But then he looked around the disaster that their home had become, and the hopelessness crashed over him again. The house was a mess beyond description. Dishes were piled everywhere because the dishwasher had broken 2 weeks ago and Jack didn't have money to fix it. Laundry overflowed from every basket and covered most of the furniture. The floors were sticky and needed a deep cleaning that Jack couldn't find time for. Toys were scattered in every room, and there were mysterious stains on the walls that he was afraid to investigate too closely. But it wasn't just the house. The children were suffering too, and Jack knew it was his fault. Tommy had been getting into fights at school, something he'd never done before. His teacher had called 3 times in the past month about his behavior and falling grades. "Tommy seems angry all the time," she'd said during their last conversation. "Has anything changed at home?" Katie had started wetting the bed again, something she hadn't done since she was 3. She'd wake up crying and ashamed, and Jack would have to change the sheets in the middle of the night. But they were running out of clean sheets because he could never keep up with the laundry. Rosie had become too quiet, too helpful for a 4-year-old. She tried to take care of everyone, cleaning up messes and comforting Luke when he cried. Sometimes Jack would find her standing on a chair trying to make sandwiches for lunch, or attempting to fold the endless piles of laundry. It broke his heart to see her lose her childhood, because he couldn't handle being a single parent, and baby Luke seemed to cry more every day. Jack worried that something was wrong with him, but he'd missed the last 2 doctor's appointments because he couldn't afford the co-pays. The baby had lost weight, and his happy babbling had been replaced by fussing and clinging that wore Jack down to nothing. The ranch work was suffering just as badly. Jack's cattle were starting to look thin because he couldn't keep up with moving into fresh pasture. Several calves had gotten sick, and without proper care, 2 of them had died. The loss of income from those animals was money Jack desperately needed, but he just couldn't be everywhere at once. The fence that needed repair had fallen down completely, and some of his cattle had wandered onto the neighbor's property. Pete had been understanding so far, but Jack could see the frustration in his eyes when he had to bring the animals back yet again. "Jack, you need help," Pete had said bluntly after the 3rd time. "This isn't working anymore." But Jack's pride kept him from accepting the help that people offered. His neighbors had been bringing meals for months, offering to watch the kids or help with ranch work. But every offer felt like charity, like an admission that he was failing as a father and a rancher. "We're managing," he'd tell people. Even when it was obvious they weren't, the breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in late August. Jack had been up since 4 in the morning dealing with a sick calf, and he was running on coffee and stubborn determination. He'd left Rosie to watch Luke while he drove Tommy and Katie to the bus stop, something he never should have done. When he got back, he found Rosie standing on the kitchen counter trying to reach baby formula from the top shelf. Luke was screaming in his high chair, his face red and angry. As Jack rushed toward them, Rosie lost her balance and fell, hitting her head on the edge of the counter. before landing hard on the floor. For a terrifying moment, she didn't move. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead and her eyes were unfocused. Jack scooped her up, his hands shaking as he checked for serious injuries. She was conscious but dazed, and the cut needed stitches. The emergency room visit cost money he didn't have, and the doctor asked uncomfortable questions about how the accident had happened. Jack could see the concern in the nurse's eyes as she looked around the crowded waiting room at baby Luke, who hadn't stopped crying, and at Jack himself, who probably looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. "Is there someone who can help you at home?" the doctor asked carefully. Taking care of 4 young children alone is challenging for anyone. Jack wanted to say yes, that he had help, that this was just a freak accident. But sitting there in that sterile hospital room, holding his injured daughter while his baby cried and his 2 older children were at school unaware of the crisis, he finally admitted the truth to himself. He was failing. Not just as a rancher, but as a father. His children needed more than he could give them, and his stubborn refusal to accept help was hurting the people he loved most. That night, after Rosie was bandaged and sleeping peacefully, Jack sat on his front porch and seriously considered giving up everything. The banker had mentioned that there were buyers interested in ranch land, people who would pay enough to cover his debts and leave a little left over. He could sell the ranch, move to town, get a regular job with regular hours and health insurance. Maybe the children would be better off in a small apartment with a father who could actually take care of them, instead of on a failing ranch with a man who was drowning in responsibilities he couldn't handle. The moon was full that night, casting silver light over the land his grandfather had worked, that his father had improved, that he and Anna had dreamed of passing down to their children. Jack thought about all the mornings he'd watched the sun rise over these hills, all the evenings he'd sat on this same porch with Anna planning their future. But what was the point of holding on to a dream if it was destroying his family? What was the point of keeping the ranch if his children were suffering because of his inability to let go? For the first time since Anna's death, Jack seriously considered that maybe love sometimes meant admitting defeat. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the dirt roads around the ranch into muddy rivers. Jack stood at the kitchen window, watching water pour off the broken gutters he'd been meaning to fix for months. Everything seemed to be falling apart at once, including him. It was Thursday morning, and he was already behind schedule. Tommy and Katie needed to catch the school bus in 20 minutes, but Tommy couldn't find his backpack and Katie was crying because her favorite dress was still dirty in the laundry pile. Baby Luke was fussing in his high chair, smearing oatmeal all over his face and the tray, while Rosie sat quietly at the table, her forehead still bandaged from her fall 3 days earlier. "Daddy, I can't go to school like this," Katie wailed, looking down at the wrinkled shirt and mismatched socks Jack had managed to find for her. "Everyone will laugh at me." Jack felt his patience wearing thin. He'd been up since 4 in the morning, with Luke, who seemed to have his days and nights completely mixed up. The coffee maker had broken yesterday, so he was trying to function without caffeine while juggling 4 children who all needed different things at the same time. "It's just clothes, Katie. Nobody's going to laugh at you." But even as he said it, Jack knew it wasn't true. Katie's teacher had already called twice about her appearance and behavior. The other kids had started asking questions about why she always looked messy, why her hair was never properly braided anymore, why she sometimes fell asleep during story time. "I found it," Tommy called from upstairs, his voice echoing through the house. "My backpack was under all the dirty clothes." Jack closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The laundry situation had gotten completely out of control. There were clothes everywhere, dirty ones mixed with clean ones that had never been folded, outgrown items that needed to be sorted, and stained things that probably needed to be thrown away. But when did he have time to deal with any of it? Tommy came thundering down the stairs, his backpack slung over one shoulder and his hair sticking up in every direction. "Dad, we're gonna be late again. Mrs. Peterson doesn't like it when kids are late for the bus." Jack glanced at the clock and felt his stomach drop. They should have left 5 minutes ago. "Everyone grab your coats. We'll have to hurry." The drive to the bus stop was tense and quiet. Jack could see Mrs. Peterson waiting with her arms crossed, clearly annoyed that they were holding up the schedule again. As Tommy and Katie climbed onto the bus, Jack saw the looks on the other children's faces, surprise, curiosity, and something that might have been pity. "Mr. Thompson," Mrs. Peterson called out before Jack could drive away. "Could I have a word?" Jack's heart sank. He rolled down his window, trying to force a smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Peterson. Sorry we're running behind again." The bus driver, who'd been working this route for over 20 years, studied Jack's face with concerned eyes. She'd known Anna well, had watched all the Thompson children grow up, and had seen the family's gradual decline over the past 6 months. "I'm worried about Tommy and Katie," she said gently. "They're not themselves lately. Katie fell asleep on the bus yesterday, and Tommy got into another argument with one of the older boys. I know you're doing your best, but maybe they need some extra support right now?" Jack nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Everyone could see that he was failing. The teachers, the bus driver, probably the other parents too. Soon someone would call social services, and then what would happen to his children? "I understand," he managed to say. We're working through some things." Mrs. Peterson's expression softened. "Anna was special. We all loved her. And we care about you and those kids. Don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it." The drive home felt longer than usual. Jack's hands gripped the steering wheel as he tried to fight off the panic that seemed to be his constant companion these days. Back at the house, Rosie was trying to feed Luke pieces of toast while the baby fussed and pushed the food away. "He doesn't want to eat, Daddy," Rosie said, her small face serious with concentration. "I think he misses Mommy." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. Of course, Luke missed Anna. They all did. But Luke was too young to understand why the warm, loving person who had fed him and rocked him to sleep every night had simply disappeared. From his life, Jack lifted Luke from his high chair and held him close, feeling how much weight the baby had lost. Luke had been chubby and happy 6 months ago, always smiling and babbling. Now he seemed smaller, sadder, more fragile. The pediatrician had expressed concern at their last visit, asking pointed questions about Luke's eating habits and sleep schedule. "Is he getting enough attention?" the doctor had asked. "Babies this age need lots of interaction and stimulation." Jack had assured the doctor that everything was fine, but he knew it wasn't true. Luke spent too much time in his playpen while Jack tried to manage everything else. He didn't get the songs and games and constant conversation that Anna had provided. Jack loved his son desperately, but love wasn't enough when you were stretched too thin to give proper care. Around 10 in the morning, Jack was trying to sort through a pile of bills when he heard a car coming up the long gravel driveway. He looked out the window and saw an older pickup truck he didn't recognize, moving slowly through the puddles and mud. His first thought was that it might be someone from the bank coming to assess the property for foreclosure, or maybe a social worker responding to concerns about the children. Jack's chest tightened with anxiety as he watched the truck parked near the front porch. A woman got out of the driver's side, moving carefully on the slippery ground. She looked to be in her 50s, with graying brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore jeans, boots, and a practical rain jacket, and she carried something wrapped in a clean kitchen towel. Jack opened the front door before she could knock, baby Luke balanced on his hip, and Rosie peeking out from behind his legs. "Mr. Thompson?" the woman said with a warm smile. "I'm Maria Santos. I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced." Jack tried to place the name but couldn't. "I'm sorry, have we met?" "No, we haven't. But I heard about your situation through my friend Carol at St. Mary's. She mentioned that you could use some help with the children." Jack's defenses went up immediately. Another well-meaning stranger offering charity he was too proud to accept. "That's very kind, but we're managing just fine." Maria's eyes took in the scene behind him, the chaos visible through the open door, Rosie's serious little face, baby, Luke's fussy squirming, and Jack's own obvious exhaustion. But her expression remained kind and non-judgmental. "I'm sure you are," she said gently. "But I brought you some fresh bread anyway." I made too much this morning, and it's better when it's shared. She held out the bundle in her hands, and Jack caught the warm, yeasty smell of homemade bread. It had been months since anyone in his house had eaten anything that wasn't from a box or a can. The simple gift made his throat tight with unexpected emotion. Double quotes Jack started, then stopped. He wanted to refuse, to maintain the pretense that everything was under control. But Rosie had moved closer, drawn by the wonderful smell, and Luke had stopped fussing for the first time all morning. That's very thoughtful, Jack said finally, accepting the warm bundle. Would you would you like to come in? The house is a bit of a mess. Maria smiled, and something about her presence felt immediately calming. I'd love to, and don't worry about the mess. I raised 5 children mostly on my own after my husband passed. I know exactly what real life with little ones looks like. As she stepped into the house, Maria didn't gasp at the chaos or make any comments about the state of things. Instead, she knelt down to Rosie's level and introduced herself properly. Hello. There, sweetheart. What's your name? Rosie, the little girl said shyly, but she didn't hide behind Jack like she usually did with strangers. That's a beautiful name. I bet you're a big helper for your daddy, Rosie nodded solemnly. I try to take care of Luke when Daddy's busy. Something passed over Maria's face, understanding, perhaps, or recognition. That's very sweet of you. But you know what? Sometimes grown-ups need help taking care of babies. There's nothing wrong with that. Jack found himself really looking at this stranger who had appeared on his doorstep with bread and kindness. There was something about her that felt trustworthy, calm in a way that made the constant anxiety in his chest ease just a little. Can I ask why you came here? Jack said, it's wonderful that you did, but ... Maria settled onto the couch, and Luke immediately stopped fussing and stared at her with curious eyes. I lost my husband 20 years ago when my youngest was just 2. I know what it's like to feel like you're drowning, to feel like everyone is watching and judging. I know what it's like to be too proud to ask for help even when you desperately need it. Jack sank into his chair, feeling something inside him start to crack. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I love my kids more than anything, but everything keeps falling apart. You're not doing anything wrong, Maria said firmly. You're trying to do a job that was meant for 2 people. That's not failure, that's impossible. For the first time in months, Jack felt like someone truly understood what he was going through. This stranger who had arrived with nothing but bread and compassion might be exactly. Jack stared at Maria for a long moment, unsure what to say. Part of him wanted to open up completely, to tell this kind stranger about every struggle, every sleepless night, every moment when he felt like he was failing his children. But another part of him, the proud part that had kept him going all these months, held back. I appreciate the offer, Jack said carefully, but I couldn't ask you to ... You're not asking, Maria interrupted gently. I'm offering. There's a big difference. Baby. Luke had been studying Maria's face with the intense curiosity that babies have for new people. Suddenly, he reached out his chubby arms toward her, making the little cooing sound that meant he wanted to be held. Jack hesitated. Luke had been fussy with strangers lately, crying whenever anyone tried to take him. May I? Maria asked. Her arms already extending toward the baby. Jack nodded, expecting Luke to change his mind and start wailing. Instead, the baby settled into Maria's arms as if he'd known her his whole life. Within minutes, Luke was calm and content playing with Maria's necklace and babbling happily. How did you do that? Jack asked in amazement. He's been crying constantly for weeks. Maria smiled, gently bouncing Luke on her knee. Sometimes babies just need a different energy. You've been carrying so much stress and worry, little ones can feel that. They absorb everything around them. Rosie had crept closer during their conversation, drawn by the calm atmosphere that seemed to surround Maria. Do you know how to braid hair? She asked hopefully. I sure do, sweetheart. I had 2 daughters of my own, plus I helped raise my 3 granddaughters. Would you like me to braid yours? Rosie's face lit up with the first genuine smile Jack had seen from her in months. She ran to get her hairbrush. Moving faster than she had since Anna died. As Maria worked on Rosie's hair, she talked casually about her own life. She'd been widowed when her youngest child was only 2 years old, left to raise 5 children on a small farm outside of town. "Those first few years were the hardest of my life," she said, her fingers moving expertly through Rosie's tangled locks. "I made every mistake you can imagine. Fed the kids cereal for dinner more nights than I care to admit. Sent them to school in mismatched clothes. Cried in the barn so they wouldn't see me falling apart." Jack felt something loosen in his chest. Here was someone who truly understood, who'd walked the same impossible path he was trying to navigate. "How did you manage?" Jack asked. "How did you keep everything together?" "Honestly, I almost didn't. About a year after my husband died, I was ready to give up the farm and move back to my parents' house. I felt like such a failure." Maria finished Rosie's braid and tied it with a hair elastic from her pocket. "But then my neighbor, Mrs. Chun, started showing up every morning with coffee and fresh eggs. She didn't ask permission, she just came. Helped with the kids, taught me things I didn't know, listened when I needed to talk." "What happened to her?" Rosie asked, admiring her perfect braid in the mirror Maria held up. "She became like a grandmother to all my children. When she passed away 5 years ago, she left me a letter saying that helping my family had given her life new purpose after her own husband died. She said it was the greatest gift anyone had ever given her." Jack absorbed this story, understanding the deeper message. Maria wasn't just offering charity, she was offering to be part of something meaningful. "I have a proposition for you," Maria said, shifting Luke to her other arm as he started to get sleepy. "I'm retired now, and honestly, my days are pretty quiet, too quiet if I'm being honest. What if I came by in the mornings to help with the children? Just until you get back on your feet." "I couldn't pay you," Jack said immediately. "I can barely afford ... "I don't want payment," Maria said firmly. "I want purpose. I want to help a family that reminds me of my own. I want to honor Mrs. Chun's memory by passing on the kindness she showed me." Before Jack could respond, they heard the rumble of the school bus coming back down the road. Jack glanced at the clock in shock. It was already 3:30. The entire day had passed while they talked, and for the first time in months, he hadn't felt the crushing weight of constant anxiety. Tommy and Katie burst through the front door, chattering about their day at school. They stopped short when they saw Maria sitting in their living room, holding their baby brother and looking completely at home. "Who's that?" Tommy asked, not rudely but with the direct curiosity of a 6-year-old. "This is Mrs. Santos," Jack said. "She came to visit us today." Katie noticed Rosie's perfectly braided hair immediately. "Rosie, your hair looks so pretty. How did you do it?" "Mrs. Santos did it," Rosie said proudly, touching the neat braid. "She knows how to do it just like Mommy used to." Katie's eyes went wide with hope and longing. "Could you do mine too?" "I'd be happy to," Maria said. "But first, why don't you both get a snack? I saw some of that fresh bread in the kitchen." As the children ran to wash their hands and slice the bread Maria had brought, she turned back to Jack. "They're beautiful children. Anna raised them well." "You knew Anna?" Jack asked, surprised. "Not personally, but I knew of her. Small town, you know. Everyone spoke so highly of her, how kind she was, what a wonderful mother. I can see her influence in how polite and caring your children are, even in the midst of everything they've been through." Jack felt tears threatening again. "I'm terrified I'm going to mess them up. Anna was so good at all of this. She made everything look easy." "Anna had years to learn and she wasn't doing it alone," Maria pointed out gently. "You've, been trying to be 2 parents at once while grieving the loss of your partner. Cut yourself some slack." That evening, Maria stayed for dinner, the first real meal the Thompson family had shared in months. She'd somehow transformed the random ingredients in Jack's nearly empty refrigerator into a hearty soup, complete with fresh bread and butter. The children chattered happily throughout the meal, more animated than Jack had seen them since Anna's death. "Mrs. Santos, do you have any kids?" Tommy asked between spoonfuls of soup. "I have 5 children, but they're all grown up now with families of their own. My youngest just turned 25 last month. Don't you miss them?" Katie asked. Maria smiled warmly. Every day, but you know what? Being around your family today reminded me how much I love taking care of children. Maybe we could help each other out? You need someone to help with daily things, and I need a family to fuss over again. After dinner, Maria helped with the children's bedtime routine with an efficiency that took Jack's breath away. She ran a proper bath for all 4 kids, something Jack hadn't managed to do in weeks. She read bedtime stories in different voices that had the children giggling. She knew exactly how to brush teeth thoroughly but quickly, how to find matching pajamas, how to tuck covers just right. How do you make it all look so easy? Jack asked as they finished getting everyone settled. 25 years of practice, Maria laughed. Plus, I'm not doing it alone anymore. I have help. Help? You, even in one evening, I can see what a good father you are. You love these children deeply, and they know it. That's the most important thing. Everything else can be learned. When Maria finally prepared to leave, all 4 children hugged her goodbye, even Luke, who usually cried when strangers tried to touch him. Mrs. Santos? Katie called out as Maria reached the door. Will you come back tomorrow? Maria looked at Jack questioningly. After a moment, he nodded. I'll be here at 7 in the morning, Maria promised. We'll get you ready for school properly, and maybe I'll teach your daddy how to make pancakes. After Maria left, Jack stood in his kitchen looking around in amazement. For the first time in 6 months, the sink was empty of dishes. The children were all clean and peacefully asleep. There was leftover soup in the refrigerator for tomorrow's lunch. The house felt calm instead of chaotic. More importantly, Jack felt something he'd almost forgotten existed: hope. Maybe he didn't have to do this impossible job alone. Maybe accepting help wasn't admitting failure. Maybe it was exactly what his family needed to heal and move forward. As he got ready for bed, Jack realized he was actually looking forward to tomorrow morning for the first time since Anna died. 3 months after Maria first knocked on Jack's door with that loaf of bread, the Thompson household had transformed in ways that seemed almost magical. Jack woke up each morning to the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of gentle conversation drifting up from the kitchen. Instead of the chaos and crying that had become his normal routine, Maria arrived every morning at 7 sharp, her own key now hanging on the hook by the door. She'd insisted Jack give her one after the 3rd time she'd arrived to find him collapsed on the couch, having fallen asleep while trying to comfort a fussy Luke through another sleepless night. Good morning, sunshine, Maria called softly as Jack stumbled downstairs, his hair still messy from sleep. She was already dressed and moving efficiently around the kitchen, baby Luke contentedly sitting in his high chair eating small pieces of scrambled egg. Look, Daddy, Katie called out from the breakfast table, her hair perfectly braided and her school clothes clean and matched. Mrs. Santos taught me how to make my own braid. Well, sort of. I can do the first part by myself now. Jack marveled at the change in his daughter. Katie's confidence had grown tremendously over the past few months. She no longer cried about going to school or worried about what the other children would think of her appearance. Maria had not only taught her practical skills like braiding and tying shoes properly, but had also helped restore her sense of pride and self-worth. That's wonderful, Princess, Jack said, accepting the cup of coffee Maria handed him. It was perfect, just the right amount of cream, exactly how he liked it. Maria had learned everyone's preferences quickly and seemed to remember every small detail that made each family member feel cared for. Tommy bounded down the stairs, his backpack organized and his homework completed, another small miracle. For months after Anna's death, getting Tommy to focus on schoolwork had been nearly impossible. He'd been angry and distracted, his grades plummeting as his behavior became increasingly difficult to manage. Dad, guess what? I got an A on my math test yesterday, Tommy announced proudly, pulling a paper from his backpack to show Jack. An A? Tommy, that's fantastic. Jack felt his chest swell with pride. It had been so long since he'd had good news about his son's progress at school. Maria beamed from across the kitchen. Tommy worked very hard on his math homework this week. We practiced multiplication tables every afternoon after school. The change in Tommy had been perhaps the most dramatic of all the children. Maria had somehow understood that his anger and acting out were really grief and fear in disguise. Instead of trying to force him to behave better, she'd given him space to express his feelings and had helped him find productive ways to channel his emotions. She'd convinced Jack to sign Tommy up for Little League Baseball, something they couldn't afford before but that Maria had quietly arranged through the church's scholarship program. The physical activity and team structure had been exactly what Tommy needed. His teacher had called just last week to comment on his improved attitude and focus. "Mrs. Peterson says I'm one of the best helpers on the bus now," Tommy continued, his chest puffed out with pride. "She asked me to help the kindergarten kids with their seatbelts." Rosie appeared next, dressed in a clean outfit with her shoes tied properly, skills that Maria had patiently taught her over many afternoons. But the biggest change in Rosie was that she'd started acting like a 4-year-old again instead of trying to be a miniature adult. "Mrs. Santos, can we work in the garden today after school?" Rosie asked excitedly. "I want to see if our tomatoes are getting bigger." Maria had started a small vegetable garden behind the house, something Anna had always wanted to do but never found time for. She'd involved all the children in planting and tending it, teaching them about responsibility while also creating something beautiful and productive. "Of course, sweetheart. And I think it's time to plant some flowers, too. Your mommy would have loved to see flowers growing around this house." Jack noticed how naturally Maria spoke about Anna, keeping her memory alive without making it painful. She'd found photos of Anna around the house and created a beautiful memory box with the children, filled with pictures and small mementos. Instead of avoiding the topic of their mother, the children now talked about Anna openly, sharing memories and stories that helped them process their grief. "Mommy always said she wanted sunflowers," Katie said thoughtfully. "Big yellow ones that would be as tall as Tommy." "And sunflowers it is," Maria said with a warm smile. "We'll plant them this weekend." Baby Luke had perhaps benefited most from Maria's presence. The fussy, underweight baby who used to cry constantly had transformed into a happy, chubby toddler who babbled constantly and was hitting all his developmental milestones. Maria had recognized that Luke needed more stimulation and interaction than Jack had been able to provide while managing everything else. She'd established routines for feeding, napping, and play that gave Luke the structure he craved. She read to him constantly, sang songs, played peekaboo, and encouraged his attempts to walk and talk. The pediatrician had been amazed at Luke's progress during their last visit. "It's like he's a completely different child," the doctor had told Jack. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up." But the changes weren't just in the children. Jack himself felt like a different person. The constant anxiety that had been his companion for months had gradually faded, replaced by a sense of stability and hope he'd thought he'd lost forever. With Maria handling the morning routine, Jack could focus on the ranch work that had been suffering. His cattle were healthy again, the fences were repaired, and he'd even been able to expand his herd with the profits from selling beef to local restaurants. The bank had agreed to a payment plan that would keep the ranch in the family, thanks to Jack's improved financial situation. "You know," Jack said to Maria as they watched the children finish breakfast, "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for us." Maria's eyes crinkled with warmth. "You don't need to thank me. This family has given me more than I could ever give back. I wake up every morning excited to be here, to be part of something meaningful again." And it was true. Maria had become more than hired help or even a friend. She'd become family. She attended school events and Little League games. She helped with birthday parties and holiday celebrations. When Tommy had appendicitis and needed emergency surgery, Maria had been right there in the hospital waiting room, holding Katie and Rosie while Jack paced the halls. The children adored her, but they also understood that she could never replace their mother. Maria had made sure of that, always speaking respectfully of Anna and encouraging the children to honor her memory. She'd helped them understand that loving someone new didn't mean forgetting someone who was gone. "Mrs. Santos," Rosie said one evening as Maria was helping her get ready for bed, "do you think Mommy knows that you're taking care of us?" Maria had paused in brushing Rosie's hair, considering the question seriously. "I think your Mommy's spirit is always with you, And I think she's very grateful that you have people who love you and want to help you grow up healthy and happy. I think she would like you, Rosie had decided. You both know how to make the best hugs. Even Jack's relationship with his children had improved dramatically. With Maria handling many of the daily stresses, he could focus on being their father instead of just their overwhelmed caretaker. He had energy for bedtime stories again, patience for helping with homework, and time for the important conversations that children need with their parents. One Sunday afternoon, as they all worked together in the garden Maria had created, Jack looked around at his family and felt something he hadn't experienced since Anna's death: complete contentment. Tommy was carefully watering the new seedlings while explaining baseball statistics to anyone who would listen. Katie was drawing pictures of how big the flowers would get, her tongue sticking out in concentration. Rosie was gently talking to the tomato plants, convinced that they grew better when you were nice to them. Luke was toddling around the garden, chasing butterflies and giggling when they flew away, and Maria was in the middle of it all, offering gentle guidance and encouragement, her face glowing with the joy that comes from being exactly where you're meant to be. Anna would love this, Jack said quietly, watching his children play in the dirt and sunshine. Yes, Maria agreed, wiping her hands on her gardening apron. And she would be so proud of the father you've become. You never gave up on them even when things seemed impossible. Jack realized that Maria was right. He had kept fighting for his children, even when he felt like he was failing them. And now, with help and support, he was becoming the father they deserved. The ranch was thriving, the children were happy and healthy, and their future looked bright again. Sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when to accept help, and the greatest gift is finding someone willing to give it. 2 years had passed since that rainy morning when Maria first appeared at Jack's door with a simple loaf of bread. Now, as Jack stood on his front porch watching the sun rise over the mountains, he could hardly believe how much their lives had changed. The ranch that had once felt like an impossible burden was thriving again, and his children were growing up healthy, happy, and secure. The sound of laughter drifted from the kitchen, where Maria was helping the kids get ready for what had become their favorite day of the week, Saturday pancake breakfast. It was a tradition she'd started about a year ago, and now the whole family looked forward to it all week long. "Daddy, come see what I made," Rosie called from the kitchen window. At 6 years old, she'd become Maria's enthusiastic helper in all things cooking-related. Jack walked inside to find Rosie standing on her special step stool, carefully flipping a pancake under Maria's watchful eye. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and cinnamon, and there was flour on just about every surface, but everyone was smiling. "Look, I didn't break it," Rosie announced proudly, sliding the golden pancake onto a plate. "Perfect technique," Maria said, giving Rosie a gentle squeeze. "Your great-grandmother would be so proud. She taught me to make pancakes just like this when I was about your age." Katie, now 8, was setting the table with the precision of someone who took her responsibilities seriously. She'd grown into a confident, capable girl who helped care for her younger siblings without being asked. Her hair was braided perfectly. She'd mastered the technique Maria taught her, and now helped other girls at school who struggled with their own hair. "Mrs. Santos, will you tell us the story about the time you and your kids got lost on the way to church?" Katie asked as she folded napkins. "Again?" Tommy groaned from across the room, but he was smiling. At 8 years old, he'd become the family comedian, always ready with a joke or funny observation. His grades were excellent now, and he'd just been selected for the travel baseball team, an honor that had made him walk taller for weeks. "I love that story," said a new voice from the hallway. Everyone turned to see Mrs. Chun's great-niece Amy, who'd started visiting on weekends after Maria mentioned how much she missed having extended family around. Jack marveled at how naturally their little family had expanded to include others. Amy was in college now, but spent most of her free time at the ranch, saying it felt more like home than her apartment in town. There was also Father Miguel from the church, who often stopped by for coffee and stayed for dinner. And Pete, their neighbor, who'd become like an uncle to the children after his own kids moved away for work. Baby Luke, who wasn't really a baby anymore, came toddling into the kitchen carrying his favorite book. At 3.5, he was a chatty, energetic little boy who followed everyone around asking endless questions about everything he saw. Story time, Luke announced, climbing onto Maria's lap as she sat down at the kitchen table. After breakfast, Mio, Maria said, using the Spanish term of endearment that all the children had learned to love. First we eat, then we read. Jack looked around the breakfast table and felt his heart full to bursting. This scene, his children laughing and talking over pancakes. Maria at the center of it all with her gentle guidance and endless patience had become as natural as breathing. But he never forgot how close he'd come to losing it all. You know what today is? Jack asked the children as they dug into their pancakes. Saturday? Tommy guessed, syrup dripping down his chin. It's the second anniversary of the day Mrs. Santos first came to visit us, Jack said. The children looked at Maria with wide eyes, as if trying to imagine their lives without her. For the younger ones, especially Luke, life without Maria was something they couldn't even picture. Tell us about that day again, Katie requested. About how you brought us bread and decided to stay? Maria laughed, her eyes twinkling with the memory. I was so nervous that morning. I kept thinking your daddy might think I was just a nosy old woman trying to interfere in his family. What made you decide to come? Rosie asked the same question she asked every time they told this story. Well, Maria said thoughtfully, I'd been praying for a way to feel useful again. My own children were all grown up and I missed being needed. When I heard about your family through the church, I felt like maybe God was answering both our prayers at the same time. Jack remembered that first day so clearly. How desperate and overwhelmed he'd felt. How certain he'd been that he was failing his children. The house had been a disaster. The kids were struggling, and he'd been ready to give up on everything Anna had loved. I was scared to let you help, Jack admitted. I thought accepting help meant I was admitting I couldn't take care of my own family. And now, Maria asked with a knowing smile. Now, I know that family isn't just about blood, Jack said, looking around the table. It's about the people who show up when you need them most and choose to stay. After breakfast, they all worked together to clean the kitchen, another tradition that had developed naturally over time. Even Luke had his job, putting the spoons in the dishwasher with serious concentration. Later that morning, Jack found himself working in the barn while Maria gardened with the children. The ranch was more successful now than it had ever been. Even when Anna was alive, with Maria's help managing the household, Jack had been able to expand his operation and even start selling directly to restaurants in the city. He paid off all his debts and had money in the bank for the first time in years, but the financial success wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was the sound of his children's laughter, the way they ran to hug him when he came in from work. The peace he felt knowing they were safe and loved. Daddy, Rosie called from the garden. Come see how big our sunflowers got. Jack walked over to find Maria and the children standing next to a row of massive sunflowers, just as tall as Tommy. Like Anna had always wanted. They'd planted them in a special section of the garden that they called Mommy's Corner, where they grew all of Anna's favorite flowers. Mommy would love these, Katie said softly, touching one of the huge yellow blooms. She does love them, Maria said gently. Love doesn't end just because someone goes to heaven. It finds new ways to show itself. Jack understood what she meant. Anna's love was still present in their family, but it had taken new forms. It showed up in the way Maria braided Katie's hair with the same gentle care Anna had shown. It appeared in the bedtime stories Maria told, keeping Anna's memory alive while creating new traditions. It lived in the way the children looked out for each other, the values Anna had instilled in them continuing to guide their actions. That evening, as they sat on the front porch watching the sunset, Jack reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The grief hadn't disappeared completely. There were still moments when he missed Anna so intensely it took his breath away. But the sharp, constant pain had softened into something gentler, a bittersweet appreciation for the love they'd shared and the family they'd created together. What are you thinking about? Maria asked quietly. The children were playing in the yard, their voices mixing with the sound of evening birds. "Just how grateful I am," Jack said. "2 years ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. And now?" Jack watched Tommy teaching Luke how to throw a baseball while Katie and Rosie picked wildflowers in the meadow. "Now, I know that sometimes losing everything is just making room for something different. Something you never could have imagined, but that turns out to be exactly what you needed." Maria nodded, understanding completely. Mrs. Chun used to say that God plants people in each other's lives at exactly the right moment. Not always when we think we need them, but always when we actually do. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Jack thought about all the people who had touched their lives over the past 2 years. Maria, of course, who had become the heart of their family, but also the teachers who had shown extra patience with his children, the neighbors who had offered help without being asked, the church community that had embraced them, and all the small acts of kindness from people whose names he might never even know. "You know what I learned?" Jack said as they prepared to go inside. "What's that?" "That cowboy who thought he had to do everything alone, he was wrong. The strongest thing you can do is let people love you. And the luckiest thing that can happen is finding people who want to." Maria smiled, gathering up the toys the children had left scattered on the porch. "And sometimes those people come disguised as strangers with fresh bread, looking for a family to love just as much as that family needs to be loved." As they tucked the children into bed that night, Jack realized that this warm, chaotic, love-filled life was what Anna would have wanted for all of them. Not perfection, but connection. Not doing it alone, but building something beautiful together. The ranch would continue to thrive, and the children would grow up strong and kind, and their chosen family would face whatever challenges came next with the same love and determination that had carried them through their darkest days. Sometimes the most ordinary moments, a loaf of bread, a knock on the door, a willingness to accept help, become the foundation for extraordinary love.